Time to bring our panel this afternoon of political strategists, Graham Morris and Bruce Hawker. Good to see you both. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I want to come back to the NBN issues. Also, can you get your thoughts on Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and the coalition government she'll be leading there? But first on this energy policy, such a big deal last week, the announcement of this, getting it through the coalition party room, plenty of people commenting on it. Labor didn't attack it too much today. They got to it about halfway through question time. But Bruce, I want to go to you first on this. How do you see this issue playing out at the moment? And look, it's important for both sides, really. I mean, how do you score the sales job for the government and the task ahead of Labor to either back it or pick it apart?
Yeah, well, I think the Prime Minister left most Australians rather confused about the new policy, and it is complex, and so I guess there's some reason for that. But, you know, once you become confused by something, you do start to doubt it, and I don't think that makes an easy sell for them. Yeah, and then, of course, there are people who say that this is really, you know, a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme or something by any other name, which would have people who are on the Conservative arm of the Liberal Party and the National Party rather concerned. So I really don't see them getting out of this thing particularly easily, particularly when they aren't able to answer a very simple question, and that is, how much am I really going to save as a result of these changes? And for most Australians, that's the bottom line. How much are they going to actually be able to keep in their back pocket as a result of these reforms? And how much is this really an attempt by the Prime Minister to appease the Conservatives in the coalition? Yeah.
But in fairness, that question about how much am I going to save with this policy was not an easy one to answer with the carbon tax, with the emissions, you know, CPRS, with any of these policy approaches. Even if you decided to, you know, build a new coal-fired power station, as Tony Abbott says, it's hard still to say, you know, here's how much you will save as a result of doing that. It's not an easy one. I take your point that the modelling needs to be done, and you know that might give a bit more clarity here. But Graham, was this the right thing to focus on last week, the savings, or should this have been solved in a better way? What do you think?
Look, just about every sector and most sensible people in the game, except for two Labor people and Bruce, have said that it's not a bad plan. And that is extraordinary from where we were a couple of weeks ago. Just about every player has said this is a plan that just might work. And I reckon the good thing is that you can see the Prime Minister believes it. You know, he's one of those sort of blokes, I think, if you give him a 100-piece jigsaw, he's bored. Give him a 1,000-piece jigsaw and he'll put it all together. And you can just see here that he thinks he's worked it out. He's got that piece there, this piece here. Everyone, he's got all the people in the room, and they said, look, I've got a plan. If you reckon you want to play in this game, here are the various sandboxes you can play in. And by jingoes, he just might pull it off. And I think that the pressure is now on the Labor Party to say, hey, we're in this, reluctantly, they would say, but we're in this, or else. They're going to come up with a different plan and explain how on earth it's going to work and how it's going to be paid for.
Yeah, Bruce, that's true, isn't it? They either back this, stick with the architecture and go for a bigger emissions reduction, or come up with something entirely different. It does put some pressure back onto Labor now.
Well, a little, but not too much. I mean, they've got their own approach to this. They've said they're going to have an emissions trading scheme, and I think that's where they can go with this. I don't really see that as being the problem. The problem here is for the Prime Minister to juggle the two competing factions inside his own government. And, you know, he's doing his best at that, but it's a problem he just keeps stumbling over all the time. And none of us are any strangers to this. This is something that he's been doing ever since he became Prime Minister.
Let's turn to the NBN. Both sides blaming each other for some of the problems we're seeing now. I don't know. Well, firstly, what's your own experience of this? Is it you know, the mess that some suggest it is, Graham, or you know, do you detect people aren't terribly unhappy? What do you think?
I live 10 minutes from the Lodge, or 11 minutes from Parliament House. Across the road from me, people have got the NBN. I haven't. I used to be a great advocate for Telstra. I haven't had internet in my house under Telstra for 6 months. And I'm really grumpy with the existing system.
Oh, yes, you are.
Really grumpy. And my kids are trying to do university assignments without the internet. Look, 20 years ago, Bob Hawke announced that that in 18 months he'd kill off, no child would live in poverty. We all laughed. And then Kevin Rudd came in and said, no child will be living in a family that hasn't got a Rolls Royce parked in the garage. And that was the NBN. And it was this hugely expensive thing that nobody... Just imagine if we were here now, we'd be, 100 billion trying to find the blinking thing. Malcolm Turnbull inherited the damn thing and says, well, look, we can't afford a blinking Rolls Royce, let's try for a Mercedes in every blinking garage. Now, I presume, you looked at it today, Malcolm really got stuck into the NBN. I presume he's thought this through, because a lot of people think that the PM Turnbull, as Minister Turnbull, was sort of responsible for that. Well,
and using the words train wreck and so on, I know he's trying to blame Labor there, but, hey, if one day they want to sell this thing, I'm not sure that's the best.
But that is right. If we'd have started where Malcolm is now... Yeah. We'd be well on the way to having the system finished.
I don't know, Bruce. What do you think? You've seen this debate over many years. Was the Rolls-Royce model under Kevin Rudd too ambitious? We'd still be waiting for it to be rolled out, not just to Graham's house, but a lot of houses, if we were all waiting for fibre to the premises.
Yeah, but we're all still waiting for the NBN anyway. Turnbull promised that he'd have this thing rolled out by 2016 under fibre to the node. And it was going to cost $29 billion. Now it's blown out to $50 billion, and most people still haven't got it. I think 50% of households have it now, so it's still a long time in coming. But the complaint that people are having about it isn't really so much that it's slow in getting there, it's that when it gets there, it's not working. Yeah, and that's because...
That's not what they thought.
Exactly, and that's because it's fibre to the node and not fibre to the premises. They're still using copper for the last few hundred metres or whatever, from that little green box out in the street to your house.
But it's also because the retailers... this is what Mitch Fifield was telling me earlier this afternoon. It's the retailers not being very clear with the customers. They think they're getting the NBN, but they're getting the very basic version, not the... they're not paying for the higher packages because no one's out there in this competitive space actually selling the service. They're selling the price, right? They're saying $20, $30, $35, competing against each other on the price rather than the quality. They need to start trying to flog the top end stuff if this thing's going to work as a prospect. Anyway, look, I want to get your thoughts too on New Zealand. We finally do have confirmation on who the government will be. Bruce, you first on this one. Jacinda Ardern, together with the Greens and New Zealand First. It's going to be an interesting coalition. But, there'll be so much focus on her as Prime Minister. This 37-year-old newbie in terms of political leadership. She's only been there less than 3 months as leader, now becoming Prime Minister. How do you think it's going to go?
I think it may well do very well under Jacinda Ardern. I met her when I was working on a campaign over there a few years ago, and she's very impressive. And I think she has sort of picked up the feeling of the New Zealand electorate, this enthusiasm, this youthfulness that she's got that is infectious. And provided she doesn't do anything really silly, then I think that the New Zealand public is going to give her a real chance. Of course, the big challenge is having the Greens and Winston Peters in the same cabinet room at the same time. I know that the Greens ministers are in the outer cabinet, or junior ministers, but nevertheless, it's going to be a big challenge to keep him and the Greens from throttling each other. But she's got a lot of policies which coincide with those of Winston Peters, and I think they were probably developed with a coalition with him in mind.
Yeah, Graham, they might share similar views on some protectionist measures, whether it's foreign investment or trade deals and so on, but there will be issues where it's really going to be tested.
Look, I've watched her for a little while, and most New Zealanders who have watched her just say she's not ready. We all wish her well and we hope she does well, but she's got this rainbow coalition. She's got red Labor, she's got green, and she's got black and white Winston Peters, and she's got to pull them all together. The only person with any history or any knowledge or experience is Winston Peters, and God help us if he's the foundation of a government.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where that test comes. Bruce does say there are areas where clearly they'll be able to work together and compromise here and there on immigration intake numbers and so on. But you know, when it does come to matters of taxation, for example, I mean, how do you fit where the Greens will want to go in terms of public spending and taxation with where Winston Peters will want to go? That's what's going to be tricky.
Yeah, those sort of issues are going to be tough, and Labor's got a policy to introduce a capital gains tax on investment properties, and I think that could be a problem for them rolling that out in their first term. But, you know, they're going to be able to argue that the money that they receive from that is going to be used to good public works and so forth. So they're going to actually have to sit down and argue that through with Winston Peters, and he will be at the bargaining table with them all the time. Just because he's a minister now doesn't mean that he won't be bargaining all the time with Labor to make sure that he gets as much of his agenda up as possible. I think when push comes to shove, I think Labor's more likely to concede to him rather than to the Greens. But, you know, Ardern needs all of them at the table. So it's going to be difficult.
Bruce, if you got a few bucks, invest in hankies and tissues over there. It'll end in tears.
On that note, we better go. Graham Morris, Bruce Hawker, good to talk to both of you. I'll see you next week.